Yeah, mostly right. I'd like to recognize Ms. Foxx, the queen, for 5 minutes.
And you don't have to stay, but I know how to pronounce it too. Okay. Okay. But I'll start with Mr. Brubeck, and I thank the chairwoman for holding this hearing today also, and thank our witnesses for being here. Mr. Brubeck, your written testimony mentioned that the limited number of non-union contractor employees who are possibly allowed to work on a PLA project would be subjected to wage theft. Can you explain how that works in practice?
Yeah, so typical PLAs, and they can vary from job to job, but what I've seen typically is they force contractors to pay their fringe benefits into the union pension and benefits plans as a condition of winning the contract. And if you're a non-union worker, you're allowed to work on a PLA project, which may be in limited numbers, but let's say you can, you would have all that money paid into those plans on your behalf, but you would forfeit that unless you joined the union and became vested in those plans. Where I come from and what I hear from our contractors, that's wage theft. A lot of contractors will actually make sure that those employees come back and work with them after the project is done. And what they'll do is they'll actually pay for those additional benefit costs that they're going to lose, get stolen from them. They'll pay into their existing plans the company has. But what happens is that puts that contractor at a severe competitive disadvantage. They have to have double benefit payment costs, which is yet another reason why these contractors will not pursue these PLA projects.
And so what you're describing is that the employer then is also exposed to multi-employer pension plans, correct?
That's right. So the employer is making the contributions to the union pension plans as required by the PLA as a condition of performing the project. And a number of these multi-employer pension plans are extremely underfunded. And what happens for the contractors that pay into these plans is they can become liable for future liabilities of the pension plans when they can no longer make the promises that they've made to the union workers that deserve benefits from these plans. And so when that happens, they get a bill for their liability. And that can be extreme. That can prevent them from getting bonding. That can prevent them from qualifying from future contracts. So they don't want to be on the hook just for one project. And PLA advocates will say, well, you can be exempt from that type of pension withdrawal liability. There's actually been legal cases where they've signed the exemption and the judges come back and said, no, it still applies to you, sorry. And these companies either go bankrupt or have to completely reduce their operation as a result of this.
Right. As I've railed against many times, the American Rescue Plan contained a provision providing over $90 billion to the PBGC, bailing out these poorly performing multi-employer pension plans that were unable to pay the defined benefit pension promises that were made to worker beneficiaries, many of which were plans in the construction industry. Why would anyone think that forcing workers to pay into these poorly performing plans is a good idea and in the best interest of the construction workers? Mr. Brubeck, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I know a number of our employees are taken care of by 401k or profit sharing or all kinds of great programs that transfer with them, and they have certainty in that. And a lot of the folks getting into the industry aren't sure about whether the pensions will be available. I understand that's why the bailout was made for some of these programs and plans. But it's certainly something that we're concerned about, and workers are concerned about their future retirements,
Sure.
and not knowing if it's there or not, and not knowing if the government's going to have to bail them out another time.
Right. I think, Mr. Ledet, that I walked in as Mr. Brubeck was talking about how much PLAs increase costs for federal construction projects. So I'll not ask you that question, but how does this increase in cost impact your ability to budget and your ability to use the limited resources available to complete much-needed construction projects?
Yeah, thank you. CPRA is the non-federal sponsor on major infrastructure in our state to protect our citizens from flooding. And so anytime the cost goes up, the cost also for the federal government, it also goes up for us, the non-federal. And so those cost increases that we referenced, if it's $400 million, we pay 35% of that. And then if there are schedule delays, that's just prolonged time that our citizens are at risk.
Right. And I think you all have, you alluded, particularly I think earlier, to PLA mandates creating new workforce shortages if contractors refuse to bid for work under a PLA. I think all of you have probably talked about that. So we all know that there's a huge worker shortage. I'm the chairwoman of the Education Workforce Committee. We're dealing with this every day. I meet with employers every day who tell me they cannot find skilled workers, and construction is one of the main areas. And so I just want to thank you all for what you're doing and for the work that you're doing to try to protect workers in this country. As my colleague, Mr. Higgins, said, people who choose not to join unions, he's right. This is about freedom. This is all about freedom in our country, and people being willing, if they want to join a union, they can, but nobody's holding a gun to their head to do it, and nobody should be holding a gun to the heads of contractors to have a PLA. And what this is all about is freedom in our country. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Allen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for allowing